What is your scary paranormal restaurant experience? Whether you work there or not, what's your story? When I was young, I worked in a restaurant for a while as a busser food runner. I was taking a break and I went to the bathroom, which was shared with a sushi restaurant next door. Think of the restrooms as a hall joining the places together. So I went in and sat down on the toilet, and I heard another person come in. I thought it was a waitress from the sushi place. I could recognize her from her stature shadow, so I just went on and did my thing. The girl was wearing white shoes, abnormal for the food business, and humming something. It sounds very cliché, but that's what she was doing. She went into the stall right next to mine, closed the door, and sat down, normal. I flushed and left my stall, and just out of curiosity, I looked to the toilet where the girl went in. It made my skin crawl when I saw that the door was wide open, and I was looking at an empty toilet. There was no way that she could have even turned around and left without me hearing or seeing her. I absolutely swear on my life that I heard and saw this girl walk in and go to the bathroom. It's something that I've never ever forgotten. I grew up in a small town in Northern California, and the town started in the mid-1800s as a mining and farming community. When I was 16, I started my first job as a hostess at a restaurant that was in downtown. Really cute downtown, looks old-timey and quaint. This particular restaurant was built sometime in the 1860s, and while I don't know much about its past before the late 1990s, it was commonly known that the restaurant had originally started as a brothel. The restaurant had seen many owners come and go since the 90s, each time only open for a few years, or even months before it inevitably would go out of business. This restaurant is 3 stories tall. Bottom floor had the bar, the dining room, and kitchen. Second floor was a huge ballroom, a sunroom, another bar, and an additional dining room and kitchen. The second-story ballroom had 40 to 50-foot ceilings and windows going all the way from the floor to nearly the ceiling with huge velvet curtains. The ballroom also had a huge, very old piano in it that had been there since the last 4 owners as it was too heavy to move. The dining room had wallpaper that depicted angels and demons. The third story had a men and women's bathroom, a storage closet, and a balcony overlooking the ballroom. Anyways, I saw a sign that said, "Now hiring" because it was being remodeled and under new ownership. They kept all of the old decorations, mainly just fixed up the bar a bit and new kitchen appliances. During my group interview, the manager joked about the place being haunted, but I was a skeptic and figured that old buildings just made weird sounds. Boy, was I wrong. I got hired and worked the front hostess desk. Behind the desk was the entrance to the kitchen, and in front of it was the staircase leading to the other floors. My first experience was on the 3rd floor in the women's bathroom. I was changing out the toilet paper and was in the wheelchair stall with the stall door open, but the bathroom door closed. I heard someone open the door and heard her heels clicking on the tile. I shouted out, "I'll be done in a minute." And I heard a woman scream, "Get out." I opened the stall door because she sounded very upset, but no one was there. Suddenly, the stall door slammed shut behind me, and I went running downstairs. My second experience was in the storage closet upstairs. The door was heavy, but you just had to put your body weight against it. I was holding some supplies to bring downstairs and put my back against the door to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. I heard someone laughing outside the door. I thought one of the busboys was playing a trick on me since he knew about my first experience. I dropped the supplies and began pushing harder, and it felt like someone was holding it shut. Finally it swung open and no one was there. I picked up the supplies and began walking towards the stairs when I saw a figure walking behind me out of my peripherals. I felt some fingers brush through my hair and then yank so hard I dropped some of the supplies. I screamed and ran into the manager's office, but he didn't believe me. My third experience was that I was setting up the ballroom for an event, and even though I was alone, I heard 3 keys on the piano and then footsteps on the 3rd floor directly above me. I knew no one was up there because there were only 2 other people in the restaurant at the time, and they were both in the kitchen downstairs. My fourth and most terrifying was seeing a black-eyed child. It was 1 a.m. and I was walking out to my car. I normally had one of the bartenders or the manager walk me out to my car, but everyone was very busy with the event going on, and I didn't want to be annoying. Across the street from the restaurant is City Hall and a huge water fountain in the center of the square. I saw a child standing in the fountain, so obviously I called out to make sure they were okay. The next thing that happened, I can only describe as demonic. The child started running towards me and laughing, But it was a very deep laugh that sounded like a maniacal grown man. It sounded like it echoed throughout the entire street. I ran as fast as I could towards my car and got in and started to drive away. I looked in my rear view mirror and the child seemed to be just standing in the middle of the street. Even though it was very dark outside, I could very clearly see its eyes were pitch black. I sobbed the whole way home. The fifth experience is actually a bunch of small ones out together. Since I was the hostess and would walk people to the dining room on the first floor, we would pass by the staircase. About 5 to 6 different times, young children would point to the staircase and ask who the old man was or if they could play with the other children, even though I could clearly see no one was there. Most people who worked in the restaurant experienced something, some more than others. It seemed to affect the women the most. Overall, most of the experiences happened on the third floor and sometimes the ballroom. We ended up never being able to use the sunroom because every single person who went in there, for some reason or another, would get locked in unless someone was physically holding the door open. The restaurant ended up closing about a year after it opened, almost to the day. This experience freaked me out pretty bad for a few days. I still get chills thinking about it. You may not think it's creepy, but it was. We have a huge walk-in cooler filled with tons of prepped food and so on. This was about 11 p.m. and the dishwasher was still there. I walked into the cooler to grab some butter. The door is huge and heavy, so there is no way wind could shut the door, especially because there was no wind to shut it. As I was reaching for the butter, I heard the door slam behind me. I was obviously startled and thought maybe the dishwasher closed it, thinking I left it open by accident. I walked to the door and started yelling for her, hoping she would hear me. After about 3 minutes of no response, I panicked. It was super cold in there. I kept banging on the door and yelling, and about 10 minutes later, she finally heard me and opened it, looking confused. Shivering, I asked her if she closed the door on me, and she said no. I told her the door closed on me, and the look on her face freaked me out. I texted my boss and told him what happened and asked him to check the security cameras. When he answered, he told me he watched and said that he saw me walk in, and about 10 seconds later, the door slammed shut. No one was behind it. It just shut by itself. That's never happened to anyone else. We were both confused and I was weary. A few weeks after. In the dining room, they mopped the floors every night and put the chairs on top of the tables. I noticed they were in their usual spot on the tables, didn't think much of it. As I was making bread dough, about 12 a.m., something happened that I can't explain. In a span of almost 5 to 10 seconds, I heard the loudest crash coming from the dining area that shook the whole building, and the lights went out quickly, then came back on. My heart was beating so fast, and I felt nauseous. I had no idea what just happened. I ran into the dining room, and my heart sank from fear. All of the fleabing chairs were on the floor, scattered, a few definitely broken. Then the whistling began. I immediately called my boss, and he rushed over. We went to the office and watched the security camera. The video showed the chairs on top of the tables, the lights go out, come back on, and the chairs were scattered all over the floor. The look on his face filled my body with dread. He promised to stay with me for the rest of the night, and I told him I was becoming scared of working by myself. He said I would be fine. This happened a few days ago, and it took everything in me, aside from the fact that I'm living paycheck to paycheck, not to quit this job. This was probably the scariest thing I've ever experienced. It was about 2:30 a.m., the baguettes were in the oven, and it was almost time for me to leave. I had to use the restroom, so I walked into the dining room to get to the restroom. I heard the whistling, but very faint. It was becoming normal, and since nothing had happened for a while, I wasn't creeped out. Got into the restroom, it's a one-person, locked the door, and sat down to do my business. About 30 seconds in, I hear a faint whisper come from outside the door. I chalked it up to just hearing things. Then, I heard someone knock very lightly. My heart stopped. I was alone, or so I thought. I sat there in silence. Another light knock. I very quietly finished my business and pulled myself together. I stood somewhat close to the door to try to hear what was outside the door. Another knock, and then I heard a faint whisper say, "Hello?" I almost screamed, and I almost pissed my pants, even though I had already peed. I kept quiet, in fear maybe this wasn't a ghost, but a junkie or creeper who managed to slip inside somehow. It knocked again, louder this time. The voice whispered, "I know you're in there." It sounded like a man's voice, but I couldn't tell. It began to jiggle the handle of the door, and that's when I flipped out. I screamed, "Leave me alone." The handle jiggled more violently and then stopped abruptly. I stood there in fear. After about a minute, it slammed the door so hard I was surprised it didn't fling open. My heart was racing and tears were streaming down my cheeks. Everything went silent for a good 20 seconds, then there was another loud bang that shook the whole restaurant again. The door swung open so violently, and no one was there. I ran out of there so fast, screaming and crying. The chairs were flung about, tables turned over, coffee cups shattered on the ground. I ran into the kitchen, grabbed my things, shut the ovens off, heck, I didn't care if the baguettes were done or not, and ran out of the building and into my car. I called my boss, sobbing and hyperventilating, and he told me to wait in my car. He arrived about 5 minutes after, his car flying into the parking lot. I got out but told him I would not go back in there. He went inside and came out about 10 minutes later, looking weary and upset. He told me he watched the security footage and couldn't believe what he saw. As soon as I had closed the bathroom door, he saw a sort of dark cloud-like figure float in front of the door. Right before the bang, the camera went to static for a few seconds to show the whole dining room a mess. Then the camera showed me running out of the bathroom.